Welcome back to the channel. This is Scaling for Success, and I am truly excited to introduce you to Susan Drumm. Susan Drumm, just for clarity, she is a client of ours, but what she does is the number one challenge that I find companies have. And so I like to put things in buckets: people, process, and profit. And people, that's a big thing in order to get it right for the leadership team to guide that company forward. So, Susan, thank you so much for agreeing to join us today. Why don't we start off with you telling us about yourself and your background and how you got to here?
Sure. I have a pretty eclectic background. I've been doing leadership development for over 20 years. And I think before people even knew, I used to say, I do leadership development, and they'd be like, huh? And now people know. But certainly the industry has gone through a lot of changes in that time. Um, but
Yes.
and a lot more well known. But because of that, we've got such a vast wealth of content and experiences of working with leaders at all different size companies and seeing them scale through their success. And so how I got into this, I have a very eclectic background. It's started with Harvard Law School, but I did not decide to practice law. Although law taught me something very important, many things, but one of them is just honing the skill on how to make distinctions and really understanding distinctions between case law more specifically, because that's how you apply it, right? This case is like this in these ways. It's not like this in these ways. I use that same skill set to make finer and finer distinctions in mindset, because ultimately mindset drives behavior. So if we want to look at the actions or behavior that people are taking or ourselves are taking, and we want to shift that, what we really want to do is shift whatever assumption and belief we have around that. And so I think that skill set is what I've been using all along. And I have this phrase that I say, managers manage actions, and that's important, but leaders manage mindset. Because if you can shift mindset, then there's a whole set of actions that naturally will occur to people that do not occur. And if you try to tinker with the actions, it's sort of like that's not the higher level place to play. But anyway, went to law school, decided law itself was not for me, went to the Boston Consulting Group doing management consulting, process redesign, market strategy, that type of work. Did that for about 3 years. And then got my really taste of consulting right out of school, and then went to NBC television via GE when GE owned it as a black belt in Six Sigma, and really learned how to, in many ways, applying that to an entertainment company was like, how do you measure the unmeasurable, right? And how do you help people use data? And I would say the same thing I apply in the work I do today, because people have a feeling or a sense. How do you actually measure that, right? And I believe leadership development is a measurable practice, and it can be a competitive advantage for you if you're able to implement and monitor and track how employees are showing up in leadership. And so we use a lot of tools that give you that kind of data of how well people are leading, and really objectively, not just qualitatively, but quantitatively. And I think that part of my career is really also what transitioned here. And then the craziest thing, at 30, I decided to go and get a master's in acting. I had moved to London, and I couldn't work over there. I was newly married at the time, and I decided I was very burnt out, because of what I also learned in working in some of these industries is you can have the best process in the world, but if the culture doesn't support it, you're dead in the water. And I can tell you it was quite frustrating trying to implement Six Sigma within NBC. And we made some headway, and we made some progress, but I still didn't feel like this was my calling. And I didn't know what I wanted to do, but all I knew is there was something about acting that was calling me, and I thought, well, this is a little break in my career. Let me pursue something that's more a passion. What I found is that what I learned as an actor was like, there's got to be a way I could translate this back to business, because you learn so much about how to authentically connect with others, how to deal with that inner critic, that voice inside your head. Because if you can't quiet that while you're in the middle of a scene on stage and be worrying about what the guy in the front row is doing, you're not going to be a very good actor. So you really get clear about what's going on internally for you in order to show up the way you need to show up. And I'm like, this is what is needed to happen in business. And this was sort of earlier stage when people really weren't talking about this kind of thing. And so after that, I found a consulting firm who did a combination of strategy work and leadership development, and fell in love with the leadership development, and then went out on, got a coaching certification, again, early days, and went out on my own back. After doing, maybe 3 or 4 years, went out and started my own business around 2005. So ever since then, been doing this work, and some amazing breakthroughs that I've seen leaders make. And it's work that I'm really proud of.
And passionate about. That comes through quite clearly. So I absolutely love that. And I want to say this phrase again that you just said: leadership is a competitive advantage. And you talked about culture too. So I couldn't agree more at the importance of those two pieces for the success of a company, and the successes you bring on, and you start to grow beyond that $1 million mark, and you're heading, much further, and your growth is faster, and you're like, oh my gosh, how am I going to manage all of these people? How are we going to keep them aligned, recruit? How are we going to do all of these pieces? And so that's what, we're here to talk about all of that today. And I'm super, super stoked. You also use a specific tool in some of your work. And so I know
Yes.
I want to talk about how you approach leadership from, let's say hypothetically, we've got a leadership team, but before we get into that, just because I know you're going to reference the tool, why don't we talk a little bit about that tool?
Yes. So I use the Enneagram, which is a powerful tool to help people understand their leadership style. And that's the formula we use it. And I have worked with many tools that help people understand themselves better. Some might know different tools such as Myers-Briggs or DISC or Colby or Culture Index or Predictive Index, right? I've worked with so many of them over the years. And about 10 years ago, truly sort of doubled down on the Enneagram, because it has several differentiating factors related to people's growth. And if I'm in the field of growth, I want a tool that very clearly articulates the path of growth for people. So many of the other tools, they're very good at helping people understanding themselves better, but it's sort of like a so what. And if you've ever done this kind of thing with your team, like, how much are you really using it? Now, how much are you actually, did performance change as a result of what you learned? Did you see the team performance shift? And I don't see any of that. I think, yes, some trust is built, some bonds are built, but that's about the extent of it. And that is just scratching the surface, at least for what the Enneagram can do. Because the Enneagram is a model for self-development and for team development. And that's how I use it. And teams have dominant styles as well. And we can look at the overall strengths of the team, the blind spots of the team, and what actionable steps the team can take to improve performance.
And you're so right. So many times companies, teams, they pick a tool, whatever tool it is, they do the tool, they have a session after the tool is done, and they go, yep, I did it. Thank you very much. I'm very excited.
We did that. We checked that box, right?
Yeah, we did that. And so what?
Right.
So what?
Exactly.
Who cares? Because you just did the one piece and that's all you got.
Yeah. Yes.
So let's maybe take the Enneagram, take your leadership coaching, if I'm a potential client, I'm coming to you, what challenges oftentimes are you hearing as people approach you and go, hey, I really need to talk about leadership?
Yes, yes. Well, as a CEO will come with a number of different challenges. One might be, hey, I've got some new people on our team and we need to build trust quickly because we got to hit the ground running and start collaborating. And I've got some old timers and some new people, right? That might be one instance. Particularly the Enneagram is really powerful in that way. Another maybe we've got to really make some changes in our organization based on the external environment changing. And I'm afraid we keep doing the status quo and it's sort of business as usual. And I see the need to change, but I can't seem to get people to change fast enough. That's another scenario. Another scenario might be, I have people who just don't get along on my team. They don't listen to one another. And it's sort of unhealthy conflict, right? There's productive conflict and then there's unhealthy conflict. And they're going around each other. There's just this infighting. And I feel like as the CEO, I have to be the parent or mediator of this. And it's just weighing me down. Like I need to be out there being the visionary that I know I need to be. And instead I'm sort of mediating this situation. So that can be another example. And in general, it could also be like, I just don't feel like people are holding each other accountable. And I feel like I have to do all the work to hold everyone accountable. And so you're not leveraging the power of a team to hold people accountable. And it's too much dependent on you as a hub with a spoke versus a team. So the hub and spoke model is exhausting for you as the CEO over time. And it is not scalable. It is definitely not scalable. So it's like, how do we change that dynamic? How do we move from a team of leaders, right? Individual leaders who are more focused on their department, their marketing department, their finance department, whatever it may be, or whatever they're focused on, than they are as a leadership team. So going from a team of leaders to a leadership team. And a team actually operates with each other, right? They're collectively better than each of them could be independently. Yet how much are they all operating independently, and you're not getting that synergistic quality of when a team comes together to produce something that no one could individually on their own. So those are just some examples of different scenarios that I've seen. I mean, there's more, but those are typical ones.
Yeah, and I'm reflecting on some of the teams that I've been with over the years, whether I was a junior member of the team or whatever, and it's so true. You have those conflict pieces where it's not healthy, it sticks around, and the person in charge is usually the one going, "Oh my gosh, do I have to deal with this again? I have my kids.
Yes,
they're lovely,
exactly.
and I have my team. You guys are adults. How come?"
Yeah.
And what do you do to bring the team together, whether it's a conflict issue or it's, hey, we've got this external force that's acting on us, we need to think differently, we need to act differently. What worked 10 years ago isn't going to get us to the next 10 years of growth, and how do we make this scalable?
Yeah.
And do you also find multi-generational pieces are coming into conversations more and more? I'm feeling like,
yeah.
Are you finding that as well?
Yes. Because different generations may be motivated. I mean, it's a generalization, but they could be motivated by different things, or like sort of a different flavor of it, right? So really understanding like what matters to you may be different than what matters to me, and how do we bridge the gap then?
Which is also critical for retention.
Yes.
Massive issues. I've got a local networking group, and we were sitting around the table 2 months ago, and 90% of the people were talking about retention and hiring, and how do we do this appropriately, and how do I create a leadership team that understands what we need to do to move that ball forward. And so this is a critical element when we talk about that, because if you don't understand people's motivations or capabilities, how can you help them? How can you bring them together? Isn't that kind of a good question?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So let's say we've got our hypothetical, sorry.
No, go ahead.
was gonna say, so let's say we've got our hypothetical team, they've come to you. How do you dive in? Do you want to pick a problem and solve that as what would work, or how do you want to do that?
Well, I'll tell a little bit about the process and some of
Yeah.
the key elements or principles behind it. You know, I think as human beings, we think we're chameleons and we can see 360 degrees. But the reality is we can't. We have a central vision and a peripheral vision. And where we point our focus of attention, that's what we see. But there's something behind our head we can't see. That's that blind spot. And what I do is I introduce the Enneagram to really help people see what they're motivated to look at, because the Enneagram is also different, that what it's measuring is the why behind what you do, not what you do, but why you do what you do, what you're motivated by. And each of there are 9 types, are motivated by a different need or driver. And so if I'm motivated to always look here, it's a pattern I developed since childhood, and that becomes my superpower. I'm really good looking in this direction. But I'm not even sometimes aware that my blind spot, about what my blind spot is, or I might be aware of it, but I don't know what to do about it. And I'm just like, whatever, right? And so the Enneagram will show you not only what that is, but also who is looking in the exact opposite direction of your blind spot. Because it's a systems model. Again, it's not just like individual buckets. Oh, high D, low I, but all this stuff. It's a systems model, and it shows how you guys are interrelated as a team. And so I could be arguing, it's green, it's green, it's green. And you could be arguing, no, it's yellow, it's yellow, it's yellow. Well, we don't get anywhere. But once you understand the Enneagram and why that person sees it as yellow and what that direction of growth is, you start to learn how they're actually your best friend in terms of growth, because the model very clearly delineates where your path of growth is. And, you know, I won't go into too much detail, but it has to do with something called your wing styles, which are the numbers on either side of you, and these arrow lines, which are the people looking the exact opposite direction. And so it really helps turn conflict on its head, because you start to learn, like, yes, that you start to learn why that person triggers you, but why their perspective is actually valuable, and how, if they work it on the high side, they have something to learn from you and you have something to learn from them. So what I'm truly promoting here is cognitive diversity, because the best teams are cognitively diverse teams. And yet the best teams, if you have a very diverse team with lots of different perspectives, that's the team that could have the most conflict. So what I help the team do is make sense of that conflict, build that empathy for understanding why that's actually valuable and looking in the direction of your blind spot. So that now, I mean, most recently, I hired a consulting practice manager, and I was over the moon to find out that she was basically in one of those blind spots that I'm in, because I know that that is going to only benefit me. Now, I also know some of the things I'm going to do are going to drive her crazy, and some of the things that she's going to do are going to drive me crazy. But I have a greater tolerance for it while we're both learning from each other, right? She has to come a little bit my direction. I need to come a little her direction, but I'm still going to value her superpower, and it's a superpower I don't have. So I think certainly as a CEO, you definitely want somebody in your team that is looking in the direction you're like, I hope you have that, right? Because we can't see everything. And at the same time, we're also growing and starting to learn about what that blind spot is and how to narrow the gap in it. So in the Enneagram, the individual growth, there's sort of 2 parts now getting to process. There's a part that you're doing your own individual work, right? You get assessed, you understand what are the strengths, challenges, and blind spots. And it's really important to understand those blind spots, because, you know, often people say, well, like, well, I don't really see this showing up. And I want to say, like, well, that's why it's called a blind spot. Like if you could see it, it wouldn't be a blind spot. But totally get that. Let's involve, and as part of our process, they're like, let's involve those who know you the best and have a conversation about this blind spot and ask, and we give them sort of ways to ask the question of like, how do you think this blind spot is showing up for me? And what do I not know that I don't know about that? And usually that's incredibly powerful for people because they're like, wow, okay, I see something I didn't see before. And now I also have a model for the applicability of how I grow. And so that there's this whole individual side of growth. And then there's the team development where you're learning about the other types in the room. Of course, that's sort of similar to what other things do, but we can also get this team report to say, and as a team, you have a dominant team style. And the team style will highlight for you typical challenges of a team of your dominance, because you might have missing types. In fact, most teams don't have every single type. Like I don't know if I've ever seen a team. And I'm talking about a team of like 10 or less, right? When I talk about team. So even if your organization has 100 people, I'm talking about the executive team, right? Or the next level down team. And if I don't know what is getting in our way as a team, but I can feel like I sense it, but I can't put sort of the words or the dynamic or the framework to it. This offers that framework so that you guys can have a productive conversation about what needs to shift. And that's a lot of that work we do through our Leadership Edge program, where we essentially take you through that. And once we identify what are the actionable steps you can take to improve team performance, now we move to the effectiveness phase where we actually do that. And we've built out so much content about, I think at this point, 15 different areas that a team might be focusing on with models and content to help you. One might be building trust, right? Particularly for a new team. Do you know that based on Enneagram type, different people value different things related to building trust? They're watching for different things. But everyone who thinks that you build trust the same way, like I really look at reliability. Well, someone else really looks at motive or a sense of belonging. So what happens is if we interpret others' behavior through our own type filters, that's where we run into problems, right? And then when you think about, you talked about inspiring and connecting with younger generations, you need to know like what motivates them is different than what may motivate you, and how you then coach them based on type. How do you give feedback based on type? How do you delegate based on type? So all the various leadership competencies that I just named, like managing conflict, delegation, communication, each of those we've built out lanes that help people understand how to flex based on what someone's Enneagram type is, what they need to pay attention to with related to that. So that's very customized development for every person.
Do you find that most of the senior leaders and CEOs, for instance, that you deal with are open to this process? Because what's going through my mind are some of the examples in my past of people who are really open to it, they're really engaged with it, and they're excited for the information that you're going to convey and so that they can get better. And then you have the others that are less excited and my way or the highway, or my way and I don't need to change. How do you deal with some of that?
Well, usually if the CEO isn't interested, it's usually we don't come in. So I'm dealing with the ones that are, right, from one state. But in a typical team, I like to say that 2 out of 10 are going to be resistant.
Yeah.
You know, you'll have some middle ones like, oh, this might be good, right? And then you got the ones that are like, this is going to be amazing. So it's a bell curve, and you're going to have the various range. I've seen the biggest skeptics though turn around like, well, that was actually valuable, you know. And some just are too afraid to look in the mirror, right? Because ego, identity, self-image can be threatened and getting in the way. But ultimately, those people struggle no matter where they are to grow and develop, and are stunted, sort of emotionally and career-wise stunted. So, you know, it's sort of just acceptance, and we work with that, and we do get some movement usually, because then they start to at least understand that they're not a chameleon. Like that's one of the biggest eye-opening pieces. That alone helps teams and people's interactions understand, oh, okay, so you see this differently. Like that alone is powerful. And I think for those types that are most resistant, they at a minimum get that piece.
Nice. You had made a comment much earlier about measuring leadership, was in the intro. And I love that, because that's a very soft skills. When we talk about creating a dashboard or KPIs, and we're looking at those metric pieces, how do you measure the success of what you're doing? How does the Enneagram help all of those pieces come together as a as a useful tool?
Yes, yes. Well, we don't use the Enneagram necessarily to measure performance. We use a 360 tool that is a quantitative measure along 27 different leadership competencies, and which are grouped into 5 main buckets. But it really highlights for people where they have a foot on the brake and where they have a foot on the gas, all in one picture. It also highlights where they have gaps in self-perception based on, because I, as the leader, also take the assessment and I rate myself, and then everyone else rates me, and I can look and see where the bigger gaps, like really highlighting for you what that blind spot is, right? Like here it is right there. So we use these two things together that can be really powerful, because the Enneagram is a self-assessment. And then the 360 is, how do your colleagues, your boss, your direct reports evaluate you? And it's done on a percentile basis. And I believe there's over 300,000 leaders in the database that you'll get to see where am I showing up in the leadership performance piece, and what's getting in my way, and what are the, again, getting to the mindsets, like what are the assumptions and beliefs that are getting in my way of truly scalable leadership.
I want to stay with that one for just a minute, the assumptions and beliefs. Back in my pharmaceutical days, I had a really good HR director, and we did a 360 and we did some of these pieces, and there was a comment that's always stayed with me about the stories we tell ourselves and about others.
Yeah.
And some of that, as leaders, when we're leading teams and departments and divisions, we're part of that leadership team, comes down to comments that we don't even realize we may have made, that our team said, oh, that's my operating agenda and I must do this. As an example, I was responsible for a specific government granting program. So it was 9.6 million and 7.2 million, two of them. And the CEO had used the words, you are responsible for getting this money in the door. But that wasn't my title. And so there was constant friction between the person who was government relations and myself. And I didn't understand it until I'd gone through one of these processes. I went, oh, there's an aha moment here, because you said as CEO that I'm responsible for this. I took it literally because that's what I do. I'm a fairly literal person, but you didn't actually mean that. You meant I'm just responsible for my piece. And so there's this friction that's now been created you didn't even realize was created. Do you see that a lot as aha moments when you're doing this?
Yes. And you would look at why you tend to translate what you're hearing, the story that you have behind it is based on your Enneagram type. And by the way, you don't change type over your lifetime. You just grow within your type, meaning you start to integrate those parts that we said are your growth path, those other people. So we like to say there's no wrong type. It's all about the level of self-development in that. And when you start to look at the patterns in which you translate information and what you make it mean, you start to, because when we understand the pattern, we can shift it. And ultimately, with all of this is about pattern recognition for me. And I think that when we talk about superpowers, like that's my superpower, is pattern recognition. And I use the Enneagram to help people see the patterns in the way they view the world and how they think, in order to have a handle of the ability to see that it can be shifted, right? In fact, just as a side note, this pattern recognition piece I've really just started to appreciate because, when I had to go through law school and take the LSAT, the way I prepared, I just took 8 practice tests and I could see the patterns in the way the questions were asked and what they were looking for. And then when I took the exam, I only missed 2 questions. I got 98%, right? And so what I learned about that is like, I have this ability to see patterns in things. And so I looked for tools like the Enneagram to help people see patterns and understand that ultimately it's about recognizing those patterns, building awareness, and disrupting the ones that aren't serving us. And so I do that with the Enneagram, but I also do that with music, which is what my book, The Leader's Playlist, is about, and how music's impact on the brain can help you interrupt patterns and create new ones. But anyway, that's a segue, but I just sort of want to really hit home. I fundamentally believe that the work we're doing in leadership development is having people recognize the patterns that are serving them and the patterns that aren't, and how to shift those.
But that's important, because if you can't recognize some of your own motivated abilities or some of your own superpowers and how to use them to your advantage to help the team and the business, then you're kind of wasting away a little bit from your talent, because that gift is really incredible. And so I'm thrilled. I do want to stay with the segue for just a moment.
Yeah.
And so talk to us just a little bit about the book. I know I've read it, I love it, and it's really intriguing to me. So please tell us a little bit more. How did you get to writing that book?
Yes. Well, I think sometimes we might even recognize the pattern, but we can't interrupt it, right? Think about your triggers, like your key triggers, the thing that like sort of sets you off. Everybody has them, right? And
oh yes.
How well can you interrupt that trigger, right? It's like, wow, it can be really hard. And certainly various leaders would have a hard time with some of these pieces. And I started experimenting with music on some of my own. And what I found is I was more quickly able to interrupt the pattern and start to practice a new way of being using music. And so I started doing research on what's actually happening here, and looking at music's impact on the brain. And it was quite profound, because the brain, music lights up all 4 regions of the brain in a way that almost nothing else can do. Music is vibrational and it's emotional, and it very quickly can touch to the core of things. So using music to sort of pair with something that is that trigger and you need to shift it, and sort of being like, oh, there's Adele again, right? And really understanding that piece, like what is underneath this pattern, and then deciding what is the new playlist that you need to be creating. And when I say playlist, I mean it both figuratively and literally. So the figurative part is, in the book, you'll see that I talk about the sort of old playlists of leaders and the new playlists that they shifted to. Old playlists might be something like, I'm treated unfairly, or I am all alone, or I am, an imposter, right? I am, underneath, like I have a fear of failure, right? And each of those, they're the very core, very like, I help people sort of get to like, what is that undercurrent? Because the key is, if you have that playing in the background, what's going to happen is you're going to keep attracting experiences that mirror that. It's a frequency. It is a vibration. And so if you want to interrupt that pattern, you need to shift that frequency. So really understanding what that old playlist is, and then deciding what is the new playlist that you want to create. Everything from like, I'm empowered to, everyone has my back. It might be all sorts of, it really depends for you on what's most resonant based on what you heard. And then truly finding music that puts you into that place. Like I had a leader, her was all about finding peace and appreciation. Like she wanted to be reminded of that. So she built out her playlist. And the key is to play that music when you start your day, when like in the, on a lunch break, when you're out in nature, and practice getting yourself into that vibrational state of that which you want to create in your life. You've got to practice being there. And so music it's almost like a turbo drive. It's a super drive to make it happen. The two other things I'll mention, like if you think about the power of music, don't you know, there's always this song or two that will take you right back to a time and place from your teenage years, right? Music has this incredible ability to do that. If you know anything about late stage Alzheimer patients and music therapy, those that are unresponsive, they put on their favorite music and they come alive. Why is that? Because it's allowing these neural path synapses to form, rejoin that have been dormant. And for us, in terms of wanting to change behavior, it's allowing those new synapses to form more quickly. So think of it like a fertilizer for your brain. If you want to create a new habit, it's going to be faster and easier when you pair it with music that puts you into the again, it has to be emotional, the emotional state that you need to be in order to make that happen.
So funny side story on that one. I love that. And I totally agree. All the pieces that you need to do to create an actionable output that changes things. I'm a runner. And so I use that when I'm doing a race. And so when I was doing a race and it was a half marathon, for instance, I know at 20 minutes, I feel this way and I need to change my state. I know at this point, an hour in, that I'm going to start getting tired. I need to pick up the pace and do this. So there were specific songs that from training,
I
knew would elicit that emotion. You put it in, and absolutely, I was head in the clouds at one point, right around that one hour mark, because it was beautiful scenery. I knew I would get this beautiful scene, and my pace had dropped because I was lolling.
Yes.
Like, oh no,
yes.
the song switched. It came on. Oh yes, of course. That's my trigger. I need to remember to do this.
Yeah.
And music can absolutely elicit the emotion, the change, and remind you of what you need to do from an output standpoint. So I loved it. I thought that was awesome.
That's amazing. I love that story. That is
so
really
side note on that one.
Yeah.
That was awesome. Okay, so when we talk about those state changes piece, because when you're dealing with a leadership team and you've got, maybe you're in crisis mode, think back to the pandemic and some of the different pieces that we had, external factors. Now you need to come back together and change. There's a lot of things that are topics of conversations now. Hey, return to work. And they're creating such friction inside conversations. Yes, you must. No, you must not. Maybe it's hybrid, but I want you to do it on my terms. There's different conversations that happen. Enneagram, I find as a tool, can be super useful because those blind spots, those things that we think we're communicating clearly.
Yeah.
But we're doing it through our own filter, our own lens. How come you don't get it? I don't understand. Gives you that way to step back and look again at the problem. Do you find that the conversations, they start off when people are trying to come together, are a little more jilted, fractured, compared to when you're using the tool, you're now 6 months in, 12 months in, now it's a much more of a conversation that flows because I know you've got my back. There's trust that's been built up. I understand how you're going to approach this problem or this challenge.
Yeah. And I understand how you can actually be helpful to me in a way I discounted before. And I think that that's the piece that you actually, if you're going to be a leadership team, you need each other. If you're just going to continue to be in a team, then there's a greater, you all win, right? If the company does well, but you don't win if you continue to like, maybe you just leave some money on the table, right? Maybe you're winning a little bit, but there's so much more you could do if you were actually connecting as a powerful team. I mean, they've done studies on this where even with sports teams, right, where they put together like the best of the best on a team, and they thought that that would make a winning team, and it didn't, right? I forget that I think it was like a basketball team that, for the Olympics or something. And it was like, no, because it's about the synergistic collaboration of that team that produces exponential results, not just a top player. And
Yes.
so, yes, top players help you. Without a doubt, they do. But if you're only playing a one-person sport, that's different, but you're not. And the other thing I'll say, because I do love some sports analogies, is like, when you're on a sports team, let's just say football or something, you're spending all week looking at the tapes, watching your performance before you get back out there on the field. And yet, how often our teams just keep going at it and going at it, and you never take a time out. We're like, how are we operating as a team? We just keep thinking we're going to keep going at it. Oh, we need clear KPIs or clearer goals. Well, yes, maybe that's true, but have we actually really stepped back to look at ourselves on tape, essentially? And that's what leadership development or facilitator and that type of work does, is say like, hold on, let's look at what's really happening here so that we can shift the system and produce better results for you rather than just keep trying to go at it.
Do you find that there are times, and I'm reflecting back on EOS, for example, it talks about right person, right seats, and sometimes you don't have the right person in the right seat. Do you find sometimes that when you do a leadership team, when you do that work, you go, well, there's this one guy and maybe, or gal, whatever it is, that maybe shouldn't be in this particular role, has amazing skills,
Absolutely.
but shift them over here. Now they're a superstar, but where they are, they're an underperformer. How do we deal with that?
Oh, that absolutely gets illuminated. And usually, I mean, I often see CEOs making changes once we go through a process like this. And it's good. It's healthy for everyone. Absolutely.
Do you find that they use the tool to help them communicate in the way that's best and understood? Because I know that can really be a point of friction when somebody hears you're not going to be in that seat anymore.
Yes, absolutely. So it's because we look at, well, what really matters to them, right? And so maybe, if they were type 7, it's about freedom and flexibility, and perhaps there's a fear of losing that, right? So then you want to highlight about, this is in terms of applying it to managing change. What about the new change might also offer new freedom or flexibility, right? That you could highlight. But you got to know what they're motivated by in order to really talk about that. Or someone else might be really motivated by the opportunity to solve a complex problem, right? And that's like, knowledge is power. Well, you might gain all this other knowledge that will make you even more powerful in how you. So knowing that is how you more effectively manage any kind of change that the organization needs to make.
I love that. I love that. What's your best story? Not telling any secrets, of course, but what's your best story? What's your best case outcome that you've experienced? You're like, oh, I talk about this for everybody because it's so cool.
Oh my gosh. There's just so many. There's best like team development. There's best individual development. I mean, I'll talk about a leader, and this is a leader who, because a lot of times people are trying to understand, how do I apply this concept of music? So I worked with this a chief marketing officer of a tech company, and a leader there, we'll call her Deborah, got a lot of feedback from us doing this 360 work, that people felt like she had sort of a chip on her shoulder and was always trying to insert herself into swim lanes that weren't hers. And she would get upset when she wasn't invited to certain meetings or left out of important communication. And when I talked to her about it from her perspective, hold on one second.
No problem.
From her perspective, she's like, look, I'm the chief marketing officer. I need to know what's going on in order for us to be successful. But I was more interested in like, okay, so is this a pattern for you? Now you've got this feedback. I wonder where else this has showed up in your career, in your life. Let's see. And so I asked her to connect again to the emotional piece of it. And for her, I said, well, when you are left out, when you feel like you weren't included on something, what do you feel? And she said, I feel anger and I feel frustration. And then we looked at, well, where else in your life is that sort of a similar thread where you feel that same thing show up? And oh man, we had all sorts of examples, you know, her ex-husband, when the kids would go to the lake house that she used to be going to and she didn't go anymore. All the way back to childhood. And that's the key. Like a lot of these start in childhood, right? When her sister got all the attention and she was sort of the mousy, quiet one and felt ignored. So we got clear that this pattern, and we put a name to it. Again, the playlist was I Am Excluded. And she used, now we had to like have a way to remind her when it was going on. We also looked at her Enneagram type, which was a type 6, which was the troubleshooter. And the troubleshooter or loyal skeptic is always kind of looking around corners and scanning the horizon for potential danger. So the way that she felt like she was keeping herself safe was she needed to know what was in that thing, and she needed to know what was that thing and what's happening here. And in a way that was not conducive to the right level of collaboration. And it's not to say that that information wouldn't be helpful. It was how she was going about it that was creating friction. And so she really got that it was the how, not the what necessarily, but the how. And if she could shift the how, and if she could work on, again, this piece around managing her fear, it would shift. So she came up with what was the new playlist for her, which was I Bring Peace and Appreciation. That was the one I referenced before. That's why I'm thinking about it. And so she created an actual playlist of at least 10 songs that she could practice that. But also her work was to notice places where she was included. Neighbor inviting her over for a glass of wine. Oh, I was included, like just kind of jot that down. And so she started to see that she was focused on the wrong, like we tend to like look everything that keeps, if we have this internal dialogue, I'm excluded, we're going to keep finding data that supports we're excluded, even though we don't want to. I don't want to be feeling that, but we keep seeing that data and we're ignoring all the, we're sort of imbalanced essentially. So once she kind of started to tip the scales in the other direction, her behavior started to relax more. And as she relaxed, more people came to her. And those relationships really transformed at work, such that even her nemesis, the guy that she had the most challenge with, they now meet for coffee every other week just to touch base on what's happening. And she finds that's all she needs. Like, let's just have a quick sync. What's going on in your world? What's going on in my world? And she's good. She's not feeling that need to manage him and manage others, which was the way she was dealing with her underlying fear that something would go wrong if she didn't have her pulse on every single thing in the organization.
I think there's such value to be had in understanding those motivation pieces. And they absolutely start when we're much younger and we don't realize it. And they show up very interestingly, and both personally and professionally.
Right.
The ability to make a change or a shift is so crucial for the success of the team and the organization. Let me look at this. This person was able to go through the process, was able to then take that information, make a shift, understand why the activities were coming up, and see that there's actually inclusion being a key thing for this person that, maybe she wasn't seeing before, because we're focused on whatever our search pattern says.
Yeah.
I'm turning left. I'm looking for cars. I should be looking for spaces.
Yeah. And subconsciously, maybe people were excluding her, because you think about this. You ever feel like when somebody's really needy and needs something, and you're almost like, I'm going to withhold it just because you need it so much. Like, think about like somebody that really always needs praise and appreciation all the time. What do you find yourself doing? Like, after a while, you're like, I'm not going to keep giving, like it's never enough. So I'm just going to start withholding it. It's sort of like a subconscious, like, you keep coming at me needing this, I'm going to take a step back because it's too needy for me. Right. And it's not to say we all like it's, and this for anyone is sort of like, what is it that we're like driven to need, and how are people responding to that? If it's sort of a pattern that is showing up as control.
Super important. So I know we're coming to the end of our time here, and I'm so thankful that you're coming to talk to us about leadership, because I talk to so many CEOs who talk about wanting to do right by their team. I want to have the best team. I want to have the team really be successful. And they're talking in those ways. And in order to do that, you've really got to dive into, well, what makes this team become a superstar?
Yeah. Yes.
That's so critically important. Now, I know that you have been super generous with a offer for those who are listening. And so I want to give a couple of minutes for you to talk a little bit about that before we wrap up today.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're curious about your own Enneagram type, your own leadership style, and want to know what it is, and even if you already know what yours might be, have you thought about what that means in terms of your path of growth? So we have a program that will not only assess, but also really clearly help you understand that path of growth, what your blind spot is, how you should work on it, help you go through that community confirmation piece that I mentioned before, to really get some data from those who know you the best, and then create a development goal or plan for yourself for the next 6 months or year, what you're going to work on. So that process is called Enneagram Applied. And we, for anyone listening, if you just put in my last name, Drumm, Drumm, as a coupon code, you'll get 20% off that, as it's essentially a 4-session course that includes
And
the
I can't tell you,
but also how to do it.
yeah, and I can't tell you how important that is. And so it was DRUMM as the coupon code. And we'll put the links in the description below, so everybody's got the links and be able to go there. Working on yourself as a CEO or a senior leader is one of the most crucial things that we can do in order to continue to build ourselves, our business, our team. And personally, professionally, it's really important. I can't say enough how valuable that is.
Yes. Oh, and I should just mention, if you're a leader and interested in doing this work with your team, we have a separate program that's specifically for that. The one I mentioned first is for an individual. It's called Leadership Edge, and you'll put if you go to Get Leadership Edge, you'll find more about how to do this with your team, so that you get a team report, not just the individual report.
Which I hope a lot of people who do this as individuals will make sure that they're looking at it from a team perspective. I know a lot of us have done different types of surveys and all these assessments over the years. Very few ever go to the team level and the interactions. And that's the sweet spot that we really need in order to drive the business forward. Before we wrap up, Susan, are there any last minute things people should be thinking about at all? Any best practice pieces, any aha things that are the first things they think of when they come through the program?
Well, just a tip, which, if you could think about just choosing one song that puts you in, excuse me, the state that you most want to be in, and just start your day with it tomorrow. It's that simple.
One song, start the day with it. I go to yoga in the mornings, And it's usually a HIIT class more than it is a yoga class. I'll be
Yeah.
honest. But one of the instructors I adore the most, she does that. All the songs that she picks, we give her some feedback and she picks them specifically for her audience. She knows us well enough to know, today you're going to love our music selection. And it does. I think
Yeah.
about that all the rest of the day.
Yep.
This is fantastic. Susan, thank you so much. Again, everyone who's watching, the links are in the description below. Please take the time to head on over. Susan is absolutely amazing. I can tell you from what we've known each other now, I think we're almost a year and a half. And so this is fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today, Susan. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.